I'm Matt.
I'm Carrie.
We are the Stagmer Brothers, a Baltimore knife and sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man at Arms, REFORGED.
This episode is sponsored by Squarespace.
We're fully aware that most of you guys that watch Man at Arms are big fans of huge weapons. And NieR Automata has all of that, plus some sexy androids. Now there's a ton of swords and weaponry to choose from this video game, but we decided to focus in on a pair of really handsome swords. The Cruel Blood Oath, which is the dark version, and the Virtuous Treaty, which is the light sword. Ilya decided he really liked the light version more, so that's the one we're gonna make. Though this sword looks a lot like a traditional katana, it also has a lot of modern elements, so this build's gonna be full of everything. We're gonna show you some traditional forging, but a lot of modern techniques as well to create a very robotic, futuristic, handsome sword.
I took a piece of 1018 mild steel to this. A piece of 1060 high carbon steel is going to be forge welded. That is going to be the edge of the blade. After this piece is forge welded, I have a couple pieces of 1045 medium carbon steel and 1060 high carbon steel. Those are going to be the side of the blade. After those are forge welded, I'm going to cut it and fold it over. That way the sides are symmetrical.
To get started on the blade forging, Ilya has to first forge weld the high carbon sides onto the low carbon center. Once he's done that, he can then create a hot cut and a fold to fully encase the mild steel core with high steel jacket. So obviously on this build, we're gonna do some blade forging. But from there, we're gonna take a pretty big departure from anything traditional and move on to some more modern techniques. This section here is obviously the handle section that gets riveted to the blade. We're gonna draw a tang area and then the perimeter of this so that it can become the base of the handle. Then this will be an overlay, another overlay, and so on. So we're gonna go ahead and just pull that out. You can see here that John started doing that. He's already separated this one from here. So from here, we're gonna have to just grab some of these other sections and cut each one of these little parts separately. What we have now is an obvious overlay. We're gonna do that out of aluminum. Then we're gonna CNC all the detail into it. On this piece, this is the Suba. This is the handguard of the sword. I'm gonna hand this off to Carrie and let him figure out exactly where to go from there. He'll do some of the line deeper than the others. The pommel's pretty complicated too. So basically what we have to do is draw in all of this detail. John's gone ahead and done that. Carrie's gonna also use the CNC machine on this. It's basically a big puzzle, a whole lot of different parts to create one beautiful sword.
John now cuts the main body of the sword. This is the section that's going to hold the blade, and it includes the tang. All of the overlays will then be welded onto the surface and the blade riveted in place.
Now that the initial forge welding is done, Ilya can now begin to draw out the blade. He moves to the Nasel power hammer to draw it out to length, and then he can move on to the hand beveling and finish the blade out from there.
John's now going to cut the overlays for this piece in different thicknesses. They'll stack on the main body and give us a much better look. Now that Ilya has drawn our blade to a nice bar, he's going to hot cut the tip off, forge the point, and then move on to forging the bevels. Now you've seen Ilya do water forging many times to blast the scale off the surface of a blade. In this case, it's really cold out, so he's just going to use some ice, it'll melt underneath the blade and work exactly the same.
Now that I have all my pieces cut for our sword, I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning them up and preparing them for welding.
He's going to deburr and sand these sections. That way when they get stacked and TIG welded or riveted together, they'll lay nice and flat.
Ilya has now completed the forging on our blade. It's time for me to use my catchphrase and true everything up. Now there is no defined Yokota line up here at the point. I'm just gonna grind that in nice and smooth, true up the lines all along the perimeter, get the surface ground, rough ground at least. Another thing we have to do before heat treating is drill our 2 pinholes that rivet this whole blade section to the handle section. We want to do that before heat treating, otherwise it's going to be really difficult to drill all the way through this material. One main thing that differs this blade from a historical katana blade is that it has a long tapered plunge. I'm going to be using the radius of the wheel and stopping it abruptly to create that sharp plunge line. Before heat treating, it's important that we drill the holes that will be used to rivet the blade portion to the handle section of our sword. Carrie's going to move to the drill press after marking his holes carefully and drill the holes in. We're also going to drill smaller holes that will be used to attach our blade overlay later. Now that the blade is rough ground and we have our holes drilled in it, we can now move on to heat treat. Billy's going to make sure he has a proper and even heat along the entire length of the blade, remove it, and quench it.
I'm going to be using this CNC mill to cut the overlays. We're going to go in and just cut them from a bar of steel. I've got it marked out. I'll use this large angled cutter. It's going to go down and cut our depth. It'll make 5 passes to go all the way down to about 1/10 of an inch deep. It's going to cut the outside border for us. Rather than cut all the way through on that border or use the plasma like you've seen us do, once we have a basic cut pattern there, we're actually just going to come in afterwards and grind right up to our pattern until the piece fits. And then we'll match the holes that are in the blade and go ahead and rivet it to this.
Now that Carrie's done milling our detail into the blade overlays, Bill's going to move to the grinder and carefully remove the excess material, leaving us with the proper overlay shape and size.
Okay, now that we have the bulk of our overlays all cleaned up and prepared, we're ready to start tack welding some of them into place.
Using a hand drill, John creates the holes where the rivets will go that hold the blade in place. So we're going to come back to the CNC mill to do the suba. I'm going to go ahead in this thick piece of 3/8 plate. We're going to cut this fairly deeply. We're going to do the perimeter quite deep. We'll cut the hole for the tang. And then as the entire piece gets cut, we'll have to stop it, flip it over, make sure the registration is correct, cut the entire thing again, and then I'll come back with a very small cutter and blank around the outside to cut it out.
we have our second structural side overlay welded on, I went ahead and put a little extra heavy bead on there with some thick rod. Our next step is to go ahead and blend out the weld, do any touch-up, then clean it up and start our next phase of overlays.
Now that the blade has been both hardened and tempered, I can move on to doing the finish grinding. I'm going to start with a 40 grit belt. My main goal is to crisp up the bevels. Then I'll move to an 80 grit, 120, 220, and so on.
Even though we're using round pipe underneath of this handle, we know that if we continue to leave it round, it's going to be difficult to control the blade. We're going to go to the press, force this down to an oval shape, make sure it fits the tang, and then the handle will be wrapped over the top.
Okay, I took the two halves of the pommel that Kerry machined yesterday on the mill, gave them some shape, ground a groove up the side for the weld, hand ground a groove up the center to fit on the rod on the end of my sword tang here. So our next step is to go ahead and MIG weld the gap, blend it out, and we'll finish it up.
The texture on this section is just straight line flutes. John's going to go to the small baiter. With a knife wheel, he's just going to cut these in, and then we'll be able to finish this out and make the overlay.
The sword is now finally coming together. Lots and lots of pieces, and it's come down to this, the final process, and that's wrapping the handle. This isn't exactly a traditional wrap, but John's gonna get the job done, being really careful, making sure each knot is perfectly tight and equal. When planning this build, we knew this was gonna be a beautiful sword. It probably has the most milling we've ever done on a build. I think the shop stepped up big time executing John's plan. And now, we present to you Virtuous Treaty. We are really excited to be partnered with Squarespace. In fact, we're going to be using Squarespace to make an all-new website where you're going to be able to find all the need-to-know information about Baltimore Knife and Sword and Man at Arms Reforged. On this site, you're going to be able to find a list of conventions and events that you can come out and meet us in person, of course, a full list of all the episodes, and where you can actually buy products that we make. And using Squarespace's all-in-one software that has no downloads, no updates, it's going to be a breeze.